Okay, cool. We couldn't do this webinar series without playing that song at the beginning. Thank you very much to everybody for finding the time to spend with us today. Your time is very much appreciated, and it's just always great to be talking to a bunch of passionate educators. So thank you. As you know, I believe this is the first part of a three-part mini webinar series. Each one stands alone, but they also, if you see this and you like it, I think you'll find the next two will build on it very well. This one's going to focus on writing, and the mission that we will choose to accept today is to consider how we might be able to use innovative technologies, just like they do in Mission Impossible, to try to bring writing into any lecture situation, including even larger classes. We will be following up on the next webinar next week on Tuesday. We'll focus on how to bring presentations and demonstrations to large classes. And the final webinar a week from today will focus more on how to give students experience giving effective feedback and learning from effective feedback. Also a very powerful skill, and how, again, you can do that even in very large classes. But today it's about writing, and so let's just jump right into the writing discussion. So, I think most of us, if we said, if you had the choice, would you have students writing more in your classes? Well, what do you think? I think most of us would use writing, and there's lots of good reasons for that. I came across this article on a website, and I've got it linked there, and we'll share all these slides so you can check it out in detail. But Brad Hughes from the University of Wisconsin-Madison has 12 different points he makes about benefits of writing. I've just pulled out 2 of those 12 that I want to highlight today, but they give you the spirit of what I think we already know and believe anyway. So that writing deepens thinking and increases students' engagement with the course material. So it really gets them into these deep thought processes. They're not just learning, they're using what they're learning. And that's a very powerful active learning experience. Writing assignments provide us with an opportunity to teach students to organize ideas, develop points logically, make explicit connections, elaborate ideas, argue points, and situate an argument in the context of previous research skills valued in higher education. All skills valued in higher education. So these are skills we want to teach our students. These are the kinds of skills that will make them successful in life, right? So there's a real good reason to like teaching. Now, finally, although it's much more important than this, writing is a skill. This is what makes it challenging. It's a skill that atrophies when it isn't practiced regularly. So because learning to write well is difficult, and because it requires sustained and repeated practice, we need to ensure our undergraduates write regularly throughout the curriculum, and I want to highlight that, in all majors. It's the responsibility of all of us to ensure that our students learn to think and write clearly and deeply. So, a very strong charge there that suggests that not only should we be having students write, but we should be having them write as widely as we can, and as often as we can, as repeatedly as we can. Are we doing that? I think not. Why? Why don't we have more writing assignments? Well, especially if we think of large classes, the answer boils down to sort of 2 things that are related. First, we have to grade that writing somehow. You can't just ask students to write something and then not, have the process end there. There has to be some sort of feedback, some sort of grade, and yeah, especially that qualitative feedback, right? We want to teach, and that requires something that students can think about to develop their writing skills. And of course, the problem is the time and resources that we need to grade and provide the feedback at scale are simply too large. We simply do not have the funding to provide this sort of feedback, at least in a traditional way, of having a professor go through one by one and do this. But if it wasn't for this, we would have a lot more writing assignments, right? I believe we would. And so what I'm going to suggest today is that there is a way to give the students that regular writing practice in any context that provides the grades and feedbacks, but provides it in a more resource-friendly way, and in fact within a context that makes the learning even more powerful. Okay, it's going to I'm going to talk about this in the context of an educational technology called PeerScholar. It's a peer assessment platform. So we're going to really leverage the power of peers here to make the impossible possible. So I'm going to first give you just a very high-level overview of how PeerScholar works here. Then we'll actually see it in action. I'll show it to you a little bit, and then we'll come back to the question of resources and such and how PeerScholar can address this. All right. So first, for the high-level one, every PeerScholar activity has 3 steps. First step is very straightforward. We call it the create phase. In the create phase, students are asked to create a composition. For today's purposes, let's imagine that is a written composition of some sort. It could be anything digital, but let's imagine it as a written composition. And of course, the instructor can provide, can attach any resources they want the students to check out to guide their writing perhaps, or any links if they want them to watch a video or something and maybe react to it, let's say. But that's step 1. Students create a composition. They submit that composition to the system and then move on to step 2. Step 2 is what we call the assess phase. In this step, students will see compositions that their peers submitted. So I'm going to show you an example, I think, where it's 5 or 6 peer compositions, where they're actually going to see what 5 of their fellow students submitted. Now, these compositions are selected randomly, they're presented anonymously, and now we ask the students to essentially take on the role of the teacher. That is to go one by one and assess each student's work and give them some constructive feedback about how their work can be better. Okay? And so they're going to do this first with one peer and then move on to the next and move on to the next and move on to the next. Okay? Now, while they're doing this to their 5 or 6 peers, 5 or 6 peers will ultimately receive that student's work and will perform an assessment on that student. So in the third and final phase, in the reflect phase, the students will see the feedback that peers have attached to their work. And now we're going to try to teach them how to learn from that feedback. So a few things we can do here, and you'll see how this interacts with the resource issue in a moment, but we can ask them to assess that feedback. Literally, how useful was the feedback? Was the emotional tone very good, for example? Those sorts of things. And we can also ask them, after they've seen these 6 sets of feedback and assessed them and thought about them deeply, we can ask them to use that feedback formatively to create a revision. So that first submission is now a draft, and now we're going to revise that draft for final submission. Okay, so that's the high level. Let's give you a sense of what it looks like. Okay. When people log into PeerScholar, they first see this dash, which just shows them any classes they're in where they use PeerScholar. And let's say this is the research ethics class that we have a writing assignment in. We go into that. And this assignment is going to be about the ethics of animal research. Normally, it would just be one of these assignment bars, and the green box would kind of move along with the dates, as I suggested in my slides. In this demo, we have them all open so I can get into all of them. In fact, I'm just going to show you what happens when we do. So in the create phase, if we jump into the create phase, it's pretty straightforward. We see just an editor here. We can write. I'm just going to paste in. There's my writing. I've intentionally, by the way, not used any paragraphs here. This will just be the highlight that this is my piece. I am that student that doesn't use paragraph structure yet. Hopefully somebody will tell me throughout this process that paragraph structure is a good idea. But I've just written all this work. I've included my references. I have a sense of word count and how it fits in the total thing. But that's essentially it. And so I can save and submit that. You may notice that there's other things going on in this interface. We can talk about them if we want, but given this is a mini webinar, I'm going to stay pretty efficient. So let's keep it at that. I wrote something, I submit it. Okay, now, once everybody is submitted, we come back and we assess our peer work. So when we get into that phase, the assess phase, it looks like this. What I'm seeing here, and this is me sort of halfway through my assessment. So what I'm seeing here is Peer 1's work. So you see that where it says Peer 1. I can read through them, so that they do use sentence structure, and I have a few ways of responding. And you see, I've already started doing some of these. So this is not a sentence, should have a stronger opening sentence. So I can pick very specific parts of the text and I can just add something to that. So these are what we call inline comments, okay? And that's one way to give feedback. But also on the right, you see a formal assessment screen here, or formal assessment pane. And this is where we can really guide the students in their analysis of the work. So we can ask them to do things, for example, like give it a rating. What would you rate this? Maybe after I read it, I think 7. But realize to think 7, I'm really looking at the writing. And so there's something I always like to highlight here. We think of writing practice primarily as asking students to write, produce, produce, produce. Producing is good, but also very valuable is to expose them to exemplars, some of which are better than their work, some of which are worse, and ask them to look at those exemplars and analyze it. It's kind of like ear training in music. What do great musicians sound like? Well, what do good writers, what does their writing look like? So we're pushing them to kind of engage in this, look at this deeply, maybe give it a grade. We could use a rubric. In this case, the implication is that we have a rubric that we've made available to them, and they can go through and use this rubric to guide their analysis. Ultimately, by the way, to work on their communication skills, we almost always want them to produce a constructive comment. So I like to say things like this. Think of all the ways this peer's work could be better. Zero in on the one thing that if they changed, that would produce the maximum impact. Tell them what that thing is and give them some sense of how to change it. Okay, so we're really, again, pushing our students to think critically about this piece, to think creatively about how it could be better, and then to express that all to their fellow student. Okay, so a very intense learning experience of analyzing and giving advice to this peer. And then they do it again with peer 2. And then they do it again with peer 3. So they're getting repeated practice and repeated experience being exposed to and analyzing the writing of their peers. Now you notice at the end, my work, you notice because it's just a block of text with no paragraphs. While they're seeing the work of their peers, they're obviously getting a very important signal about how their work compares. So a great metacognitive push to get them thinking about their own work and where it fits. Normally, we don't even let students see this, right? But now they're able to see it. So we can amplify that. We can actually ask them to analyze their own work, and we can make this the same as what they were doing for the others, or we can make it something different. Okay. So that's the second phase, this intense phase of analyzing and assessing the work of your peers, and in so doing, kind of seeing where your writing fits. Okay, so we've now done that. We've assessed, in this case, 5 peers. 5 peers have assessed us. So finally, in the last phase, when we go into the last phase, you'll recognize that our written assignment there, because of the lack of paragraph structure. What's going on here is there's my work, and now as I flip from peer to peer, what I'm seeing is what this peer said about my work. What rating did they give it? How did they score me on a rubric? What sort of comments did they give me? Let's see, peer 1 gave a little bit richer comment here. And again, what we ask students to do here is, first of all, rate this feedback. So we can actually ask them to assess the feedback. And this really gets them thinking about how to consume feedback effectively. So one of the things that we like to do, for example, is to get them to separate how useful was the feedback. Did this person actually give me some ideas about how my work could be improved? And also, how did it make me feel when I read that feedback? Happy and confused would be kind of weird, but maybe confused and embarrassed. Maybe the feedback showed me that my work isn't very good. Maybe enlightened and embarrassed. There we go. And so I now see that, and I feel a little bad about it. But that could be my reaction. Now this is helping students consume the feedback. So we're pushing them to think about it deeply. And again, we'd do this with peer 1, peer 2, peer 3, peer 4, peer 5. So they would repeatedly analyze feedback and think deeply about the comments peers are giving them about how their writing could be better. And then if we wish, we can actually say, okay, here's your writing, make it better. Okay, go ahead and revise this and do whatever you wish to do to improve the work. Okay, let's come back here. And let me just go to the previous one for a second. So I think now you get the sense of this process that students go through: compose, assess their peers, learn from feedback. And so, you know, it's a very rich, deep learning experience. But you might say, the problem is somebody still has to grade this, don't they? Well, not necessarily. So first of all, if you have at least every assignment graded by at least 5 or 6 peers, then there's research out there done by us and done by others, so it's been replicated many times, that shows that as long as you have at least 5 peers rating each piece, then the average, that peer average, is perfectly in line with the sorts of grades that teaching assistants and other experts give. So you can just have this powered completely by peers, and not just in terms of the grade that their composition receives, but also the feedback. You can literally have peers grading the feedback. And so you can come up with a grade now on writing that is a combination of the quality of the writing in addition to the quality of the feedback. And if you leverage that, that makes students take the feedback very seriously, and that really makes the learning experience powerful. So you could literally, tomorrow add 10 writing assignments to your class and not have to grade or mark any of them or give feedback to any of them. Okay, it's possible. Now, it's also possible that you do want to get into the mix, that you want to add your expert level comments and your ratings to the and maybe it's going to be your grade that stands. Maybe the peer grades are just to inform, but your grades are what matter. If you want, you can do that. I do a lot of that because I like them to do the revision. I also like them to do a reflection afterwards. And so I grade the quality of their feedback, the quality of their original draft, the quality of their final paper, and the quality of their reflection. So I grade all of those things. And what we found is grading all of those things takes about 12 minutes per student. Okay, so if you do have resources available, then this is another approach. I want to highlight, though, also something else. A quality hybrid. This is a Lexus hybrid. Looks nice, huh? Very sexy. Some instructors do a combination of these two things. So they might say the following: we're going to have 5 written assignments in your class. One of them will be marked by experts, but we're not going to tell you which one. We're going to have you do all 5. And then after you've done all 5, then we're going to choose one randomly. And that one will be graded by an expert. And maybe you want to even say, and that expert grade will count for 50%, and the other 5 will be based on peer grades that also count for 50%, let's say. So what does this allow you to do? It allows you to get that regular practice with very few resources. So the resources you would use for one activity, you now get 6 activities or 5 activities worth of learning out of it. Okay, so even in large classes, even when resources are low. All right, so what have I told you today? Well, writing is great. Okay, it produces a very powerful learning experience. It helps students structure their thinking and structure their communication, very useful skills. This power is amplified when we add in peer assessment, self-assessment, and this formative use of revision. We're making the educational experience better and better and better, deeper, stronger, more durable, more powerful in the end. And we can do this now in a way that respects your time. This is all driven by students. You don't have to do much at all other than set up the activity and define it. Other than that, it's all driven by students. So it respects, the fact that most of us are very strapped for time. and it really puts the learning in the hands of the students, which really empowers the students as well. And of course, it can be done in a resource-friendly way. And if any of you do not know this, this is our, I know some of you are not Canadian here, this is our Canadian $2 coin, affectionately known as the toonie, to differentiate it from our $1 coin, which is the loonie. That's how we are in Canada. We do things like that. But the point here being that you can do all this in a very cost-effective, resource-friendly way, produce this powerful learning experience. So, hey, it's possible. It's possible. You can bring writing to very large classes. I've been doing it for over a decade in my 1,700 student introductory to psychology class. If it works for me, it'll work for you. If you're interested and you'd like to learn more, we are here to help. Info@PeerScholar.com. We are happy to give you a much more fulsome demo of PeerScholar and how it all works. Also happy to help you get set up if you're interested in trying this. Maybe in the summer class you want to go. Fantastic. Let's do it. We will, in fact, sort of on a one-on-one way, help you to get set up and comfortable with the system when you're using it for the first time. So we would love to be there and help. Please reach out to us. Let's get her going. All right, info@PeerScholar.com. Thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it. If there's any questions and answers, let's do that for about 10 minutes now. Okay, thanks.